Hello there, my name is Martin Henley. This is the Effective Marketing YouTube channel. And if you spent any time here at all, you will know that I am on a mission to provide for you through this channel everything you need to be successful in your business. And as far as I know, the only way to be successful in your business is through your sales and marketing. So not only am I giving you everything I know on this channel, I'm also pulling in anyone who will talk to me to extract as much information as I can from them about sales and marketing to support you to be successful in your business. So interestingly, yesterday, our guest had 44 experiences on his LinkedIn profile. Today's guest only has 2. And I'm not entirely sure what that means. But his experience in sales and marketing going all the way back to 2002, so that's 20 years. He was originally managing director of Phone Intelligence. He is now CEO of Sticky Marketing Club. He is the author of 5 books, count them: Sales Therapy, Sticky Marketing, Stickier Marketing, Digital Selling, and Myths of Marketing. And what you might not know about today's guest is that sales and marketing is actually his second career. And the first part of his career, he was involved in orchestration arranging as part of the Royal Academy of Music at Abbey Road Studios. Today's guest is Grant Leboff. Hello, Grant.
Hi, thanks for having me. Nice to be with you today.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, man. In the weird way that this is working, because I don't know, well, I do know why, because I'm trained to ask for referrals. So I'm asking everyone to throw a couple of people under the bus. And it was Warren Cass who set me up with you.
Yes.
You are one of the few people that I knew of that I've spoken to through your books that I didn't know to reach out to. So you're kind of a little bit famous, I think, in marketing. Do you feel like you're a little bit famous?
No, I don't feel like I'm famous. I occasionally feel like I'm old because just very, very occasionally I've done, because I speak as a big part of what I do for a living. And just occasionally I've spoken and I've had somebody a lot younger than me come up to me and say to me, "Oh, you were recommended reading on my university marketing course."
Wow.
And and that always makes me feel incredibly old when that happens. It's happened a few times, and of course, these people that come up to me are significantly younger than I am, so it
Okay.
always makes me feel quite old. But yeah, not famous, just old.
Okay. All right. So old. So we should do this. You can't tell us who you were involved with this orchestration arranging. It was pop music. You were at Abbey Road. Why did you decide to stop doing that and start and become a marketing type person? Is that the way it happened?
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting. I got into marketing in a big way through music. And this might sound a little bit cynical, but the music is a business like any other business. So, as a naive sort of teenager, I got into it for the art, as I think a lot of people do, and realized quite quickly and quite early on that musicians were just product, bands were just product as far as the industry concerned. It was just about how much money you can make. And I suddenly realized that, and this might sound incredibly naive to people watching this or listening to this, but I suddenly realized that actually a lot of people's success was nothing to do with how talented they are. It was how well they were promoted and marketed themselves. And that got me fascinated with the whole world of marketing. And actually, my background academically was behavioral psychology. Um, and so I found the link between behavioral psychology then and marketing and communication just more and more fascinating. And at the same time, the web was becoming more and more commercially interesting as well. And all of those things led me to believe that I wasn't in the most exciting place anymore. All that people think, music is glamorous. And the final nail in the coffin, I'll never forget actually, I was working in New York uh, for Record Company, and I was sitting on the New York subway going into work, and I was reading Q magazine. For anybody that remembers Q magazine, which was a music magazine, and there was a massive interview. It was pages and pages long. I can't remember how long, but it was pages and pages long with David Bowie. and I really like David Bowie. And I was reading this interview. It was an interview, and I was reading the interview. And the very last question of the interview was, if you were starting again now, would you do music? And I don't know if he meant it or whether it was flippant, but his answer was, no, I do something on the internet. And
Okay.
that for me was the final nail in the coffin, because I was already thinking about moving into other things anyway, and that was kind of the nail in the coffin. So he was partly responsible. I don't know if that was a flippant answer of his or whether he meant it, but it had an effect on me anyway.
Yeah, there is an interview, I don't know if you've seen it, where he's talking about the internet. And I don't know when it is, but he's just saying, like, this is the thing that's going to define the whole world. And we haven't even, I don't know when he was saying this, it might have been the early 2000s. He was saying, we haven't even seen the beginning of this. This is going to be the most exciting thing. So he was 100% a fan of the internet, 100%.
Yeah, he was, and he was an early adopter as well, and he was very into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was certainly genuine about his interest and enthusiasm for it. Whether he really meant that he wouldn't have done music, I don't, if he was starting again at that point, I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And at the beginning of this, when I started having these conversations, there was a definite theme where people had creative pursuits, at least, before they went into marketing. So there were a number of DJs that I spoke to. There are people who have been actors or were hoping to have careers in actors. I auditioned for the part of Oliver Twist on a BBC production when I was about 12. I didn't get it because my cheeks were too fat. So there definitely seems to be a theme where like creative types end up in sales and marketing. And yeah, because I think quite a lot of it is performative, isn't it? Quite a lot of it is carrying a performance until such time as you've got the results to actually justify yourself, maybe.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think you have to be careful, because obviously there's an academic rigor to marketing, which sometimes I think gets forgotten. But I agree with you. I mean, in as much as, so if you look at psychology, we know that human beings have two systems of thinking: system one and system two. And system one is the subconscious, and system two is the conscious, kind of slower, more reasoned mind, if you like. Obviously, they're not binary; they work together. But most behavioral psychologists agree that 90 to 95% of what we do is system one, which is the subconscious, not the conscious. And that leads to a great quote by a guy called Jonathan Haidt, who's a behavioral psychologist and sociologist out of America. And in one of his books, he says the rational mind thinks it's the Oval Office, where really it's the press office. And the point is that, all the decisions are really made in system one, and then we justify them in system two. System two is really the alibi. It's the way we justify it to ourselves, and more importantly, to others. And the reason why I'm saying all this in relation to what you just said is because actually, if you understand that system one is dominant, and that's your subconscious, then all sales and marketing, and I teach this a lot, is theatre. Because in the reality is that the way that you influence system one, the design of a room, if you're having a sales meeting, the colors you use on a website, the language in which you describe something, and the feelings it evokes, all of these things is system one, and people don't realize. Probably my favorite example of system one, which I think a lot of people wouldn't even think of as marketing, they think of it as packaging design, but it's marketing, is the fact that when Red Bull launched, they launched with a small can. It's the most brilliant piece of marketing, because if you aren't aware of that energy drink and you walk into a supermarket or newsagent and you see that small can, the immediate inference is that must be powerful stuff. That's why they haven't put it in a conventional 330 milliliter can, because if they do, it's going to blow your head off. So it's
Yes.
the most brilliant bit of marketing, because it's a subconscious signal that this stuff really is powerful, without saying a word. It's just in the design of the product or the design of the package, um, and people are unaware of how much we're influenced by that subconscious architecture. So I mean, I 100% agree with you. I think almost all sales, marketing, communication, persuasion, and influence happens in system one. It doesn't happen in system two.
Yeah, I really think that as well. And it's interesting that you talk about the language that people use. I've got a bit of an issue with the jargon. I'm doing like a jargon busting thing also on the channel, because it just seems that so much of what marketing people say is just complete junk and designed to kind of disguise, I don't know, the fact that they don't know how they're going to achieve what they're supposed to be achieving. So that's interesting. You've also said there's an academic rigor to this, and I've got an issue with that because I feel like the academic stuff, because I teach as well, so I have to share
Mhm.
the academic stuff with people. But I also feel like it's been, I don't know. I don't know if it has the real world application that maybe it should have. I don't know. Anyway, we'll probably get into all of these things. Um, what we'll do is we'll go through the format, if that's cool, and it'll give us lots of room to go wherever it is we want to go. So, as you
Perfect.
know, there's only 5 questions. So, the first question is, how are you qualified to talk to us about marketing? Who do you work with? How do you add value to their lives? The third question is, what is your recommendation for people who want to get better at their marketing? The fourth question is, what should people read? And the fifth question is, who can you throw under the bus to have these conversations with me? So let's start at the beginning and talk about how you are qualified to talk to us about marketing.
That's a great question. So, how am I qualified? So, I suppose I'd say I'm qualified in a few areas. The first one is that my background in behavioral psychology, because actually marketing is all about people, and it's amazing to me how few marketers actually understand how people work. And actually, effective communication, people is everything. How do you influence people? How do you persuade people? How do you communicate with people? How do you move people? So I think that is a qualification in and of itself. The other thing, I've been in marketing now for 20 something years. Um, so just experience of the doing. I ran a direct marketing agency, which I built up and sold. I now run a reasonably successful consultancy. Um, and I've written 5 books, which I don't think necessarily makes me a great marketer, but it does mean that I've done a certain amount of study and thought and analysis about what I'm doing, because you can't write a book without
No.
thinking things through. Certainly not getting the publisher to publish it at the end. So I think my qualifications, I would say, were experience, understanding of psychology, and the fact that I've done um, an awful lot of analysis and thinking about marketing in order to be able to write 5 books about it, which means hopefully there's a depth to some of the things that I talk about.
Okay. So what was the motivation for writing the books? Was that a marketing exercise or was that a calling?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I would say it's a calling, if that doesn't sound too pretentious. Um, I was running a direct marketing agency when I wrote my first book. So my first book was called Sales Therapy. It came out in 2007. And in the marketing agency, we had some IP that we were using, um, and it was very successful. And I knew that I couldn't. You can't own intellectual property in as much as you have employees that come and they learn your system and they learn what you're doing, and then they leave because they're progressing their own careers. And they can't unlearn what you've taught them, nor should they. So I had no interest in trying to protect my intellectual property in as much as that was unrealistic and silly. But I did want to be able to kind of prove that some of that original thinking was mine. And I thought it was interesting for people to read. So that was the motivation for writing book one. Book one was really a line in the sand to say, we're doing some things differently here, and this is what we're doing differently. And I thought that it had a double use, which was one, personally, it enabled me to kind of prove that it was my thinking and sort of cement my thinking in a format where you could say, look, I had these ideas. And second of all, hopefully by sharing those ideas, it was going to be useful for other people. So that really was the motivation for writing the book. And to be honest with you, my motivation for writing all the others has not been about IP. But the others it's all been about thinking I have something to say that's useful for other people. I mean, I'll let other people judge whether I do have anything to say that's useful. That's not for, but that was my. I wouldn't write a book if I didn't feel I had something to share. It wasn't a marketing exercise in that sense.
Okay. So that's interesting. I've got an idea that I've never shared with anyone. Um, when you're training or you're speaking, and I've spoken to a number of trainers and speakers about this, it's like when you feel like you might be losing the room, what you have to do is you have to up the theatre, to get people more involved. So there is, coming back to this theatre thing, my theory is it doesn't, it's all just stories for me. It's all just stories, and some stories are much more exciting and interesting and motivating maybe than other stories. So for me, it almost doesn't matter what story it is that you're telling. What's more important is the effect of that story. So for me, marketing is really simple. There's no deep, dark secret of marketing other than just go and do some marketing. Do you know what I mean? You can flail around, you'll hit on some success. And as long as you recognize that and invest more in that, then you'll be successful. So as long as the story has and the presentation has the effect of motivating people to go and do it, is that enough? And I suppose we're coming immediately to this academic rigor thing, which is this science or is it something else?
So I'd say two things. So when I talk about academic rigor, what I mean by that is I don't mean academic rigor as in terms of that it's scientific as such. What I mean by academic rigor is, okay, I'll give you some examples. I can ask a room full of marketers, can you tell me the difference between targeting and segmentation? And most people in the room don't know the answer. I can
Okay.
ask marketers, can you define what marketing actually is? And most people don't give me an answer that's acceptable from an academic basis. I can ask marketers, can you tell me what branding is? Not what a brand is. Everybody knows what a brand is. I don't never ask them. I wouldn't, you know, the average person in the street knows what a brand is because we've all grown up with brands. They might describe it in a different way. I'm not worried about that. But if I ask a marketer, what is the process of branding? If you're going to brand something, what does it need to achieve? How does it work? What does it mean? Most marketers can't tell me that. So I'm not saying that there's an absolute science to. And by the way, if you ask a marketer, what do you mean by market positioning and how do you achieve one? Um, Again, most marketers can't answer me that. And that's what I'm talking about by academic rigor, because for me, too many marketers aren't students of marketing. They get into marketing because they're tacticians. I mean, in the modern world, there are an awful lot of people that have got into marketing because they did a successful Facebook advertising campaign, or they garnered quite a lot of followers on Twitter, and then they think that qualifies them to be a marketer. And the problem is, and by the way, I'm a punk. And when I say I'm a punk, I don't mean a literal punk. I mean anybody can put their hand at anything. You don't need formal training. You don't just go do it. But if you're going to go do it properly. Understand what it is. Understand what it means, how it works, how it operates, and then you've got the tools and the levers to make things happen. So I would never say that marketing is an exact science. I think you have to test and measure stuff all the time. You never know 100% what's going to work. What I'm saying is I think there are too many marketers that don't even understand marketing strategy at all. They understand tactics, Google pay-per-click or Facebook advertising or whatever, which doesn't actually qualify them to be marketers. It qualifies them to run a really effective Facebook campaign, which is fine. That's what I mean by academic rigor. Uh, on the other part of what you said, which I think is interesting, if you were, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said. If you were to say to me, um, what's the ultimate discipline of a marketer? Because, like you said, to tell the stories, I don't even care. To quote you, I don't even care what the story is, but how does it move people? How does it touch people? How does it do those things? So I would say fundamentally, the fundamental skill of any marketer is to be able to see the world through their customers' eyes or through their target audience eyes. And if you can do that, then you might be onto something, because then actually the stories you tell, you'll I say you'll know. I'm not saying you'll know. You'll have an idea of which stories to tell. You'll have an idea of which stories are most likely to resonate. You'll understand what the world looks like to your audience. You'll understand how they perceive things, how they look at things, and this is the biggest shock for me. And I do this all the time, by the way. So I've got personal experience of this. Go into a marketing department, and sometimes I'm talking about some big companies, by the way, who I obviously won't name, but go into a business and ask the marketers in the room, when was the last time you spoke to a prospect? And sometimes they can't even remember. And that's just shocking. For me, in order to be a good marketer, you have to hang out with your target audience on a regular basis. In fact, I'd be as dogmatic as to say that 20% of your time, so one day of your week, if you want to put it that way, in a 5-day week, should be spent hanging out with customers and prospects. Because if you don't stay close to them, you can never be effective at what you do.
Good. Great. I 100% agree with you. I 100% agree with you. That is the skill of a marketer. And I put it slightly differently, but, if you want to know, like, the secret to why people buy from you, like, your customers all know the answer to that question, but nobody goes and asks them, So everyone's like, oh, it's so difficult coming up with messages. Well, the motivation, like, those people were all motivated to do it. All you need to do is identify that motivation and land that on your prospects as a pitch. What's interesting is that there is space. Like, you came up with this IP for your first book, or you came up with the IP and you presented it in your first book. I've also come up with like a system, and I know several people who've come up with like systems or processes or ways to get this work done. So I think what I'm saying is that there is space in marketing to do that. And I think you're right. You really want to understand it. Like, different from you, I didn't study psychology. I studied politics because I wasn't very academic and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I studied politics, and then I kind of went towards philosophy. And of course, that's talking about the way people live and breathe and are motivated. And so I think that's how it's found its relevance. But I think the point is that there is room for us, for you and I, and anyone else who wants to create our own IP in marketing about how it works and how you get it done and how you measure it. Whereas if we were accountants, there wouldn't be that space, or if we were lawyers, there wouldn't be that space. So, I mean, I'm talking maybe too broadly and too cavalierly, if that's a word, about, we can make up our own stories. But at least there's space, not at least, there is space in marketing to do that. Because my favorite thing also is, whenever I stand up in front of a group of people, is ask them to tell me what marketing is. These people have spent quite a lot of money to come and learn about digital marketing, and they don't actually know what marketing is. So I think it's interesting like that. Question mark.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's always room for creativity, and there's always room for adding value and coming up with ideas. The world is changing, it's evolving all the time, which means that things, the digital space is a classic example. I don't think it changes the essence of marketing, but it certainly changes some of the application. It certainly changes some of the possibilities, negative and positive, and other things. It means that certain aspects of marketing become even more important, and perhaps others less so. So I think there's always room for creativity, for your own input. So I agree with all of that. I suppose my thing is that if you really want to be a master of something, if you really want to know a discipline, then you have to have some rigor about what you're doing. And actually, rigor normally comes from passion. So I'll give an example, right? There are very few football fans on the terraces that you'd ever go and see who wouldn't know who George Best is or wouldn't know who Pele is, because they're just football fans. They love football. And if you love football, you might be 15 years old. But if you you love football, you go back and you find out, oh, Pele was originally considered the best footballer in the world, and there's this guy called Maradona, and there was this Irish person called George Best who was unbelievable, played for Manchester United, and your passion leads you to go and check those players out. And YouTube these days allows you to go and see them in action as well and see some of those things. And so anybody that loves football would know about those players and would know about those things, and probably would know about some of the great teams, the Brazilian team in the 1970 World Cup and those things, because they love football and they love the game and they want to find out more. And actually, if you look at people that have innovated in football, someone like Pep Guardiola, who innovated and built on that Barcelona system, which was originally Cruyff, wasn't it? But that Barcelona system, right? He built on that because he was a student of football. So he came up with his own ideas and he came up with his own originality. And of course, Pep Guardiola has been incredibly successful as a manager, but he built on everything that came before him. It didn't exist in a vacuum. And it's exactly the same in marketing. If you love marketing, then you'd go back and you'd study some of the history of the great brands. You'd know about Procter and Gamble and how they almost single-handedly invented brand management. You'd know the idea of where the soap opera came from and that original advertising. You'd know about those things, not because you're an academic and you have to go and read hundreds of books, but because you're passionate about your discipline. You want to get better, so you want to understand what happened and came before you. And when you've got that rigor and you understand that, actually, I would argue it's easier to be creative. It's easier to build on those things. But there are too many people, I believe, not everybody, of course, there's some amazing people out there, of course there are, but there are people out there that don't have that rigor, that regard themselves as great marketers, and you have a 5 or 10 minute conversation with them, and they just don't have that. And, that would be a bit like speaking to someone that said they know football and they're knowledgeable about football, and then you'd say to them, talk to them about Pele, and they'd say, who? And the moment they
Yes.
said who, I don't know who Pele is, you just laugh at them and say, you don't know anything about football if you don't know who Pele is. But in marketing terms, that's what you have often. So that's what I mean, I suppose, by the rigor and the passion and the understanding. But I wouldn't suggest for a moment that you can't build on that and build creative. And I do think you're right. That's what makes it interesting, exciting, and a fun place to work.
Yeah. And I think a couple of things about that. When I go into a room to teach digital marketing, you know, um, one of the one of the situations, it's not a challenge necessarily, there will be people who are busy doing digital marketing. There'll be people who've done no marketing whatsoever. There will be traditional marketers. Now, for me, the traditional marketers are much better off coming into digital marketing, even than the people who are doing it, because they will understand, they will have been doing marketing. They'll understand the principles of marketing. And all digital marketing then is just a number of new platforms, new ways of implementing those principles. Um, and then the second thing, I think that the trouble with digital marketing is that there are too many people who know where all the buttons are. Like you're saying, they know how to run a Facebook campaign or a PPC campaign or whatever, but they don't know the principles of marketing. And this is an issue in digital marketing right now, because I don't know if you're familiar with the data wars that are going on between Apple and Facebook. But basically, Apple have just ripped the legs from under Facebook. So the data's not going to be available anymore. So they've just seen they had $250 billion wiped off their valuation. So that makes my point. Maybe even Facebook don't know about marketing. Do you know what I mean? And that's the big thing, is that marketing is done so incredibly badly so much of the time that it feels to me like it is wrong, which is why I've had to develop my own thing. Do you know what I mean? And this is the last thing I want to say. You put on top of that layer cake the jargon and the BS that everyone's talking, and it's just an unholy mess. I mean, it's an unholy mess is what it is. I'm not asking enough questions. I can't just say question mark every time I run out
No,
of things to
well, no, I
say.
can react to that. I can react to that because I agree with everything you just said. And of course, digital, there are some unique skills and things about digital, but ultimately, digital's a channel like anybody else, right? And no one would say they're an expert in marketing because they know how to make a great TV ad. They'd say, I'm brilliant at making TV ads. I know how to narrate it. I know how to produce it. I know how to storyboard it. I know what works in that format. I'm not so good, I don't understand brand management. I don't understand market positioning, but I do understand TV advertising. What you have in the digital world is you have someone that's particularly clever at search engine optimization, or particularly clever at Facebook advertising campaigns, notwithstanding what you just said, which of course is right, or someone that's very good at the analytics and understands how to interpret the analytics. And then they go from that and say, I'm an expert in marketing. And it's not a channel, but marketing isn't channel specific. Marketing is a discipline, and then channels just become distribution methods for your messaging. And whether that distribution should be TV, radio, magazines, direct mail, billboards, cinema, or Facebook, depends on target market, the point of that particular campaign, and everything else. But yeah, we've got a lot of channel experts who tout themselves out as marketing experts. And by the way, I've got nothing against any of these people. I'm sure they've got the best intentions, and some of them are very good at what they do. The problem is exactly what you just said. The problem is that because they call themselves marketing experts and not Facebook experts or whatever, it muddies the waters of marketing, and then you've got a lot of underperforming marketing and things that aren't working. And then I agree again with the jargon stuff. I mean, I try not to use jargon at all, because jargon is something that people use either to sound clever or to hide behind, neither of which are particularly good. So yeah, no, I agree with you 100%, and it is a problem. And of course, you don't need qualifications to be a marketer, which is fine, because actually there are some brilliant marketing people out there probably haven't got qualifications. But of course, the danger of that then is you get an awful lot of people calling themselves marketers who can't. Whereas, going back to your accountant analogy, if you're not a qualified accountant, you can't really call yourself one. Because there is
Yes.
well, you can't say you're a doctor if you're not. There is a medical qualification that sits behind that. And of course, marketing isn't like that. And there are, thousands of professions and disciplines that there's no formal qualification to be able to call yourself that. But it does lead to some challenges. Agreed.
It 100% does. And where this goes wrong is right, and I'm interested in the psychology of this. So my experience is with small and medium-sized businesses, but typically small businesses. And there's a psychology. So where it goes wrong is right at the beginning. So my process is, firstly, you identify a market. And a market for me is a group of people with a problem or a desire that they're willing to satisfy by spending money, kind of a thing. Then you develop solutions or products to meet their needs. But that's not what goes on in the world. Like, people go into business to do a thing because they like doing it or because they're good at it, with no sense of whether there's any kind of market for it. And then the psychology kicks in where people don't believe what they're doing is delivering value. So they shouldn't invest too much energy in trying to get people to buy it. And there's this kind of steamroller effect going on. People don't like marketing. They don't want to do it. They don't like sales. They don't want to do it. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in. And this is the war that I'm fighting, is trying to get people to understand this ever so slightly differently, so they can see the value in it, so that they can do it, so that they can be successful in their businesses, so that they can be successful in their lives. That's kind of my mission. But it just seems to me that marketing is essentially broken. Like, right at the very core, it's broken. I don't see people doing it well or right. And even, like you say, the largest corporations, it feels to me it's not because they're doing marketing so well, but just because they've got such huge budgets and such huge influence that they're almost too big to fail at that point. So the question for me is, and I mean, the titles of two of your books interest me: Sales Therapy, because people need therapy when it comes to sales, and this Myths of Marketing. Like, these two things trigger me because This is my experience here. This is what I'm seeing in the world. So, were those books happening to address the situation that I'm seeing, or are you seeing things differently?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So sales therapy was exactly that. Sales therapy was that people find sales so uncomfortable and so incredibly difficult. Mainly, in my view, is because they don't understand what sales is and they don't frame it correctly in their mind, and they don't understand how to be good at sales without thinking that that means they have to have a slippery tongue and fool people into buying things that they don't want, which is not true or doesn't have to be true. So that's what sales therapy was about. So 100% sort of, you know, sounding, I don't want to assume, but sounding, meeting some of those um, challenges and issues that you cited. Myths of marketing, I got very excited about. Myths of marketing was essentially, so my publisher, Kogan Page, have a Myths of Business series. So they do myths of management, myths of leadership. There's quite a number in the series, I can't remember. And they were looking to do myths of marketing. And I spoke to them about it and I got very excited for the very reason we're having this conversation. There are so many things that people just don't understand about marketing. They don't really understand what a brand is. They don't really understand what the difference between market segmentation and targeting is and why it matters. They don't really understand what marketing is, what makes marketing effective. There are just so many myths. So the opportunity to write a book where you could just take on some of these myths that people talk about and destroy them or educate people so they understood was, to me, a really exciting prospect. So I jumped at the chance of being able to write it, and I must admit I had a lot of fun um, doing it because it was like cathartic
Fantastic.
experience.
Okay, cool. So, for example, sales. So, like, because I'm doing this thing, spending my life, I'm talking to marketing people, I'm talking to sales people. Like, clearly, people are just wrong when it comes to sales. Sales, if everything's going right, should be the best job in the world because your marketing should be delivering you people who have an interest in buying the product or service that they're selling. And the salesperson's role then is just to make sure they have the very best experience in buying that thing. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it should be the easiest job in the world, but people absolutely hate it because, like you say, they don't know what it is, but also they don't have the work of salespeople. The work of salespeople are leads. So if your marketing aren't delivering those leads for you, then you don't need salespeople. So very often I would go into pitch and the prospect would say, okay, Martin, either we're going to engage you to do some marketing or we're going to employ some salespeople. And my response was always the same. You know, if you have too many leads, then you need salespeople. In every other instance, you need to invest in marketing to get to those leads. And that is like the very tip of the iceberg. Like that's not 95% of the work that goes on. That is just the outcome. So 100% people are completely wrong about sales. And they're completely wrong about marketing. And like I said in the intro to this, like this is how you're successful in your business. Just get good at this bit. Just understand that you're in the business of having customers. That's what being in business is, and doing that profitably, and you will be more successful. So, myths of marketing, where on earth do you start? Like, is the whole thing not just a myth?
Yeah, well, there's not. I suppose the way that I started was to think about all the things that people wheel out and say and don't really understand, um, what marketing is. So I'll give an example, right? All right, if I do a lot of talks around the world, speak at different conferences and events and things like that, and you'll often get someone in a business setting who will stand up at a conference and say, "Well, my business is successful and we don't do any marketing." Right? So that's classic. So you say, "Well, hold on a minute, right? Do you understand what marketing is?" Because marketing is deciding what you're going to sell, the scope of your product and service. It's deciding how it's going to be distributed, how people are actually going to access that bit of marketing. It's to put it that product or service that you're offering. It's deciding what the value exchange is going to be, so what you're going to charge for it as well. Um, And then the last bit, which is the bit you were saying you don't do, is the promotion bit. It's telling people about it and doing all those things. But in order to have a business, you have to have decided what the scope of the product or service offering. You've had to decide how people are going to access it, and you've had to decide what you're going to charge. So this idea that you've done no marketing is patently ridiculous, because business strategy is essentially marketing, which always goes back to one of my favorite quotes as a marketer of all time, which is actually not by a marketer, it's by Peter Drucker, the godfather of management consulting, essentially, who said in his book in the 1950s, The Practice of Management, an organization has only two purposes, only two things that provide value for it: innovation and marketing. Everything else is cost. Because exactly what you said earlier, Peter Drucker said the only purpose for a business is to create a customer. And if the only purpose of a business is to create a customer, the only things that create a customer is innovation and marketing. Everything else essentially is cost of sale. Operations is just cost of sale. Obviously you've got to deliver it well, but it's a cost of sale. If you don't have any customers, you don't need an operation. You don't need a finance department if there's no customers spending any money. So, that's a classic example. So that's where you start. I started to think about all the questions that I get when I'm at conferences and events, or all the points that people make at conferences and events, and that I always deal with politely and respectfully, because I wouldn't be any other way, but actually inside of me drive me insane. Like when someone tells me they don't do any marketing, which is patently silly, as we just explained. So that was a myth. One of the myths was, I don't do marketing. Well, of course you do marketing. You just don't know what marketing is. That's why you said you don't do marketing. If you knew what marketing was, you wouldn't say you don't do marketing. At best, you might say, I don't do any overt promotion, which is
Yes.
not the same as saying I don't do marketing, of course.
Yeah, and I mean, I would go. I don't want to fall out with. I don't want to argue with Peter Drucker, but I would say even the innovation for me is a little bit sketchy, because for me there's too much innovation. Like, the innovation I want to see is talking to your market in exactly the way you've just expressed. You heard your market, all the things that they weren't quite getting right, the myths that they were purporting, and you deliver a solution to meet that. So for me, there is nothing in business that isn't marketing. There is nothing in business. And those people who say they don't do marketing, like, if you scratch the surface, what they'll say is, oh, it's all referrals. So for me, like, delighting your customers to the point that they send you more customers is marketing. Like, it might not be staged in the way that this is, where I'm going to demand that you throw two people under the bus before I let you go, but it's still the same thing, isn't it? So delivering value for your customers, for me, is marketing. It's the whole thing is marketing. Good. They'll say, "Oh no, we don't do any marketing. We've got a retail outlet right by Oxford Circus Underground." It's like, well, what is that if that's not positioning? Do you know what I mean? It's like, that is marketing. Oh, we don't do marketing. We're at the top of Google. That's marketing. Do you know what I mean? It is
Yeah,
insane.
yeah.
Okay. Good. So we're on the same page. Is there room, do you think? Because there's a guy I'm going to speak to in Israel who says that this should be formalized, regulated. You should be able to become, and I know you can become, there is a chartered marketing something or other, but
Yeah.
there should be formalized. Could that happen in marketing?
It could. I mean, I don't know if it's desirable. I'm not a big fan of regulation. I'm not a big fan of those things. At heart, I'm a liberal, so I get very nervous about regulation, because I think those things are always open to abuse, and open to other things. And also, you know, do you become a good marketer, or do you learn how to pass an exam? I
Yes.
mean, it is an accountant that's done I mean, I'm not casting any aspersions on accountants here, by the way, but I'm just saying, is an accountant that's done a formal accounting qualification a really good accountant, or have they done a formal accounting qualification? In other words, there's a base from which they're operating. Okay, they can't fall below this, but it doesn't make them good. The same way as I don't think a lawyer, that's got a qualification from done a law degree and passed anything from the Law Society necessarily doesn't make them a good lawyer. It means that they've got a basic level of knowledge. So that's all regulation ever does, really. It's almost the lowest bar that no one can fall below. So I'm not a massive fan of that. I'm not sure if it particularly would help the situation, because I think in all forms of life, really, there are good people and there are not so good people, and there are one or two brilliant people, and it doesn't really matter what the discipline is. I think that's true. I think when you get to things like medicine, I suppose we all need the confidence to know that even if we're going to a doctor who's not very good, there's a minimal amount of knowledge that they've acquired to be able to use the term doctor and prescribe anything. So I
Yes.
think that there are some industries where it's necessary to set a minimum bar. I'm not sure in marketing it's particularly necessary. I mean, I don't know the gentleman who you're referring to, and I don't know the full extent of his argument or hypothesis, so I wouldn't want to
No.
judge that per se. But just in a more general way, I'm not particularly fast. And I would also say to people anyway, if you want to know if a marketer knows anything, I can give you 3 questions to ask and give you the rough answers. I mean, not the exact answers, but the rough answers. If they can't answer these 3 questions, be scared. Don't hire them.
Yes. Because
Doesn't mean they're good, but at least they're not bad, if that makes sense.
well, they're not awful.
They're not awful, yeah. Yeah.
But the cost of this is huge, because businesses are going out of business every day because they can't get this part of their business right. I mean, I'm saying marketing is your entire business. If you're in business, you need to get good at marketing. You need to get good people in, because that's the only way, essentially, I think you can be successful. But people go out of business every day and they lose their homes and their families get broken because of the stresses of this. And it's because, for me, this is far more important. Like, there's a certified person to make sure the government get their bit of money, in exactly the way that they want it. But there is no way of, firstly, getting these people to understand that it's about marketing in the first instance, and then getting them some decent help. Because I don't know if you're familiar, but the average lifespan of a digital marketing customer in London is 3 months. So if that's the average, it gives you a sense of how appalling the support is or the agency is that people are getting access to. So this is an incredibly important thing. This is life or death for small businesses and the families that are behind them. I don't know it. That for me spikes the injustice. That's why I'm here doing this. I'm doing everything that I'm doing is because I really feel for those people who aren't, even by my definition, a market. They haven't realized they've got the issue. They haven't said they want to solve it by spending money. They're not. So yeah, I don't know. This is where I am. This is why I am what am I? Whatever I am. Whatever I am. But just because I see the damage that it does. I see how stressful it is running businesses. And this is the key. Like, if people just knew that they should just invest all of their time in the marketing, and then you'll have the money to start providing solutions. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think I think we agree with each other, to be honest. I think the nuance for me would be that Peter Drucker quote basically concurs with what you said. The whole thing about Peter Drucker is he's basically saying marketing is business strategy, because marketing is essentially creating the product or service offering, deciding on the distribution mechanism of that product or service offering. It's deciding what you're going to charge and what people would be prepared to pay for that particular product or service offering, and then how to communicate it and promote it, which essentially is the entirety of business strategy. Which goes to one of my favorite quotes of all time, which was David Packard from Hewlett Packard, who said marketing's too important to be left to the marketing department. Which is exactly right. Because basically my entire business success is based on my ability to market. So what I would say is, when you're hiring a practitioner, the reality is You might hire someone to help you with your strategy. That's true. But most people that are hiring practitioners are hiring them for tactics, for
Yes.
tactical execution. I need to get this known. And actually, the failure of a business, while how can I not? I mean, I agree. Look, if someone loses their house or even puts 2 or 3 years hard work into an idea that doesn't work out, all of those things are terrible. It's not nice to see. It's not nice to hear about. Uh, I don't think any right-minded individual would disagree with that. I suppose what I would say is, and I don't mean this harshly, so I hope it doesn't come across as that, because that's not what I mean. But ultimately, I'd say the responsibility lies with the business owner, not the marketing practitioner who they've hired. Because business strategy, the viability of your idea, and all of those things, most business strategy is done at board level. It's done at owner level. Now, my job on a day-to-day basis, actually, as a consultant today, I work at those higher echelons. So I work with the C-suite, putting together those marketing strategies at that very top level. So actually, personally, I would take responsibility. If I get my job wrong and I don't know what I'm doing, and a business fails or doesn't do as well as it should, then I am culpable for some of that. And I would take that responsibility as well. But I think at those lower levels where you're hiring a practitioner to run you a pay-per-click campaign or run you a Facebook campaign or whatever, if that doesn't work out, I'm not sure how culpable the practitioner who executed that campaign is. They may have done a good job, they may have done a bad job. Um, that's true of anything in life. But the reality is the failure of the business itself was probably a failure of strategy and all the things we've discussed. Did you really understand? Was there a requirement? What issue are you solving? Was there a need? Did you have a solution that actually had value to it that people were always going to be prepared to pay for? Have you done that research? Have you hung out with your customers enough? Do you know who your competitors are? How are you positioning yourself? Um, and all of that really, I would say, is the responsibility of a founder of a business to even know if that business is viable. So I think we absolutely agree on the heart and soul of it. I suppose my question mark would be as to the culpability of the average marketer for any failure. Not that they would take no responsibility, but I think failure happens at a high level of strategy, which, to be honest with you, most marketers aren't working in.
Yes. So 100%. So for me, that is the only the only thing that will interfere with your actual existence is having the wrong product. Like not for the wrong market, or one of those things, like not having a market or having the wrong product, or so it's that level of marketing that will lead to the fail. Everything else, like you can tweak the brand, you can tweak the price, you can tweak the targeting, but if you're adamant that that has to be the product, then that's where I think businesses, that is the only thing in marketing that will kill your business. Everything else I think can be quite tweaked. Like you say, everything has to be tested.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree, but I do think there's a level of, and this is what I mean about the academic robustness again, at that high level, that if you don't understand, you will get it wrong, even though you've got a viable product. So let me give you an example, a real tangible example of that, which hopefully people can identify with. The problem with this always, I'm sure you always fall into this problem, Martin, is that the only way I can explain this is by using big brands, and they're not always 100% relatable. But if I use a brand no one's ever heard of, a company that no one's ever heard of, by definition, it won't mean anything to anybody. But let me give you an example. So Toyota, many years ago, decided they wanted to get into the luxury car market, didn't they? And they decided that they weren't going to do it with a Toyota. They were going to create a new brand, which they called Lexus. And they've never disguised the fact that they own Lexus. In fact, most Toyota garages and Lexus garages are next door to each other. And I remember, this is quite a few years back now, but when I was looking at cars, I was looking to purchase a new car, and I went into the Lexus garage. The guy from Toyota actually walked out the Toyota garage into the Lexus garage with his Toyota t-shirt and served me and talked to me. So Toyota have never tried to hide the fact that that they own Lexus and they created Lexus. But here's the point, right? Someone brilliant, because it's not obvious. I mean, it's always obvious afterwards. I understand that, but it's not obvious. Somebody understood that Toyota couldn't be in the luxury car market, and it's not obvious because Toyota are a well thought of company. They've got good reputation. They make excellent cars, right? But it goes back to exactly what you said earlier about understanding the requirement you're satisfying. One of the things that people want when they buy a luxury car is they're buying it for status. They're buying it for that reputation that they drive a nice car. And therefore, Toyota could never go into the luxury car market because it wouldn't work. Let me give you the example. Let me give you the scenario. You're at a dinner party, right? You're sipping some champagne on the veranda, right? And someone says to you, "What car do you drive?" And you turn around and you say, "I drive a Toyota." And then you have to say, but not one of the luxury ones, one of the expensive ones. It doesn't work. At the point you have to justify your purchase, you're better off going and buying a Mercedes or a BMW and job done. When someone says, "What car do you drive?" you say, "I drive a BMW," and you don't need to justify it. So somebody at Toyota who's brilliant at business strategy or marketing, as we've said, a lot of those are one of the same thing, understood why Toyota couldn't go into the luxury car market and why it wouldn't work, and created this new brand, all with that expense, called Lexus. And of course, it's been a phenomenal success. From an operational and engineering perspective, it works. So my point to you, based on what you said earlier, is because I agree in essence, but what I'm saying is Toyota had a product that absolutely works, this luxury car. But if they'd got their marketing wrong, their positioning wrong, and they knew the target market for it, clearly. But if they tried to launch it as a Toyota, I believe it, I mean, we'll never prove it's a sliding doors moment, isn't it? But it would have failed, in my opinion. And it would have failed for the reasons we've just explained, even though it was viable and everything else was good. It was the fact that they called it a Lexus and created a new brand is what made it successful. And that ultimately is brand and market positioning.
Yes. And we're not disagreeing, because I'm not saying you can't screw it up with the rest of the marketing that goes on. But what I'm saying is if the product doesn't have a market, it's irredeemable. You can't, there's no coming back from that. That one thing
Right.
on its own will kill your business. So that's what I'm saying.
You're right. Yeah, true.
Okay, good. So that brings us to question number 2 already, which is, who are you working with and how are you adding value to their lives? So you've kind of given us a taster.
Yeah, so yeah, we've kind of answered that a little bit. I hope I add value. I mean, so my agency, which I sold, was a doing agency, as most agencies are. We were tactical. People would come to us to do email campaigns, to do telemarketing campaigns, to write good copy for them. We were reasonably tactical. I sometimes got involved with the strategy because when someone came to our agency for tactical execution, I understood that the strategy wasn't robust enough and anything we did tactically wasn't going to work because they hadn't quite got their positioning or other things right. So I would intervene at a higher level, as it were. But as an agency, we were selling tactical solutions, as it were, writing direct mails, doing telemarketing, writing emails, etc., etc. Mostly sort of below the line marketing activity, as it was called. Today, I spend almost my entire marketing life working at that sort of very, very high level. So, have we got the brand architecture right? Have we got the market positioning right? Have we got the offer right? Have we got the segmentation and targeting of our audience right? All the big things that, as you said, Martin, if you don't get right, chances are you're going to fail. So hopefully I'm adding value because I can't think off the top of my head of a company that I've worked with where we failed. And ultimately, I wouldn't describe myself as a failure preventer. I'd describe myself as maximizing opportunities. But it's the other side of the same coin in many ways. So if you don't get your brand messaging right, if you don't get your market positioning right, if you don't get your offer right, if you don't get your segmentation and targeting right, you're going to fail. So the fact that the companies I work with aren't failing, they're doing good, they're doing well, hopefully means I am adding value along the way. And I think the other value that hopefully I add when I work with businesses is just challenging their thinking. Because, I come in and I'm often working with chief executives, and I work on occasion with some quite big brands. Um, and I get the opportunity to challenge and say things to the chief executive that sometimes his or her own colleagues won't say, because there's politics involved and they're not worried and everything else. Whereas I don't have that. I'm a very I can't hold back. It's not me. And it's not what I'm paid to do anyway. If I say things that they don't like and they fire me or say they don't want to work with me anymore, that's okay. That's all right. So I just tell people how it is or how I see it. I'm not going to say it's how it is, because I'm not saying I'm always right, but I tell people how I see it. I mean, I'm brutally honest, or hopefully I always do it in a respectful and kind way, but I'm honest with people. So I think the other bit of value that I add sometimes is I say things to the CEO that they haven't heard before because no one else will say it. And I think that often adds value as well, because I think we all need to be challenged. Even if sometimes we get challenged and we think we're still right. I think just the challenge itself means there's a bit of a robustness to our thinking, because we're forced to think things through a bit, perhaps on a deeper level than we would have done otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. And what did I want to say? Like two things. The first is we were a marketing agency, like between 2005 2014. I wanted to be doing strategy with businesses, like really, because that clearly is where you add the most value, is actually working out where they are, what they've got to invest, what they want to achieve, and how they might get there. That's really cool, interesting, valuable work. Nobody wanted to do that. They wanted the tactics. So they just wanted some email marketing or some telemarketing or some SEO or whatever it was. But clearly you can't just start throwing money at those things without having some sort of strategic position. So we would sell them those things, and then they get the strategy bundled in, because we wouldn't want to do it without that consideration. So that's the first thing. I'm agreeing with you 100%. Okay, so the second thing I want to say is I'm really interested in this idea of agency, in this idea that if you are inside a business, and I think it must be true, if you are inside the business, you spend all of your time developing this product or this service or this solution, then it's much more difficult to see things from your customer's perspective. So you almost need somebody to come in from outside and say, and challenge and say, okay, you need to think about this and you need to think about that. And I 100% agree with you. Here's my question, which might be a little bit challenging, is brands quite clearly get it really wrong sometimes. So how, if all of this thinking is going on and all of this support is going on, do they manage to get it so wrong? Can I give you a current example of a brand that I think is going wrong? So I don't know if you've seen, but M&M's have gone woke, is what they're calling it. So what they've done is they've got these little characters, they're M&M's, and one of them used to be a bit quirky. Well, he is now fully anxiety-ridden. One of them used to have like sexy boots, and now she's wearing sneakers, like flat-sole shoes. So what they've done is they've gone woke. Now, for me, I don't really understand if people's gender politics or their anxiety probably is feeding their desire to be eating chocolate. So maybe there's some identification in there. But I first became aware of this because Russell Brand was talking about it on his YouTube channel. And what they did is they gave somebody like Russell Brand the opportunity to think about their business for a minute. And so immediately you go from, okay, who are they satisfying? Like what percentage of the population are actually so interested in gender politics or anxiety that this is going to make a fundamental difference to their business? But then Russell Brand can go, okay, well, let's hope that they're not making this marketing noise to disguise what else might be going on in their business, like the child slavery that goes on in West Africa and is associated with the chocolate business, for example. So that for me seems to be an example. And I suppose around this woke idea or this politicization of everything, like big brands are acting. And for me, it seems like I did a stand-up comedy course, and they told us that don't do politics because you're going to upset half the room. Because half the room believe one thing, and the other half believe the other. So just don't, unless you're really clever, just don't do it. Do you know what I mean? But I see brands doing politics now, and it seems to me that that is like like a fundamental mistake. Like, why upset half the population? You know, um, how on earth does that happen? That brands like Mars can go so what I think is so wrong for like such a minuscule portion of I don't know. That's my question.
Yeah.
How do they
It's a
get it
it's a
so
it's a
wrong?
it's a brilliant question, and it's led. There's so many things in what you've said. You've touched on so many issues, I think. But let me try and answer the question as best I can because it's a brilliant question, and as I said, there's a lot of things in there. But if I can try and answer it as best I can, I would say a few things. I would say the first thing is and we said this ages ago, but it's so important. Marketing fundamentally is to see the world through your customers' eyes. And I believe that there are too many businesses out there that don't spend enough time with their customers. Just hang out. It can sound incredibly dogmatic, and of course, I don't mean it in the literal sense. You know, I do to a point, but what I'm saying is you should spend 20% of your life, if you're a marketer, hanging out with your customers. And by the way, hanging out with your customers means that if you sell handbags, actually go into the department stores that they're being sold and watch people taking handbags, looking at handbags, chat to them about handbags, not yours, just generally what you're looking for, why you're looking for it, why do you care, what matters to you, what doesn't matter to you. And by the way, hang out with those same customers in the pub. So you get to hear the other things that are going on in their lives because buying happens in an ecosystem. It doesn't happen. It's not when I go into the handbag store, I'm not just thinking about handbags. I'm thinking about dresses. I'm thinking about lifestyle. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm a bit low at the moment and a bit depressed, and actually buying a handbag makes me feel good about myself and it's a bit of a treat for myself. In other words, buying doesn't happen in this binary thing where it's just me and the product or me and the service. There's other things going on in that person's world. So, you need to you really need to understand your customers. And I think that there are too many brands and marketers who are in their ivory towers. So they're sitting in their, beautiful offices in some great North American city and losing touch with the everyday folk that buy the product. And then they come up with these ideas, which in their own little bubble seem incredibly fun and interesting. But actually, most people just don't care about and aren't interested in, and they cause themselves lots of challenges with that. So I think my big answer to your question would be people just lose touch with their customers, or they think they know what their customers like. Because here's the big thing that I think a lot of marketers do is they think they are the customer. Well, I eat M&Ms, so I'm like my core customer. No, you're not, right? In fact, the day you work for a brand, you're never your core customer. Because even if you use the product, let's take toilet paper, right? Because everybody uses toilet paper, right? If you work for a toilet paper brand, you now no longer think about toilet paper the way all your customers do, right? Because you think about toilet paper 24/7. You care about it. You know what's going on in the marketplace. You understand what the competitions are. You understand what the latest innovations are. The average punter in the street couldn't care less. The only time they notice toilet paper is if it's running out, there isn't any. Otherwise, it's like a non-product. They don't care most of the time, right? So the point is that you cannot think of toilet paper the way your customers do once you work in it, or M&Ms or anything else. So I think the big answer to your question is that people lose touch with their customers because they don't hang out with them enough, which for me is a prerequisite in marketing. Hang out with your customers and hang out with them a lot, at least 20% of your time. The other part that I would say, which I think is a disease that's happening in marketing at the moment, and hopefully will get cured at some point or will lose, is that marketers no longer believe that doing marketing is enough. So now you've got all these brands that are purpose driven, and it's just ruining marketing, because actually I don't need my chocolate to have a purpose. I just want it to taste nice and pick me up when, give me a treat when I'm at work, or give me a snack afterward. And there's all this purpose thing, because and I don't want to pick on this brand particularly, right? But I'm just using this example. So I might forgive me, because it might be a few years out of date, but it just made me laugh. So Lego at one point went on a thing that their purpose was to create the builders of tomorrow. And it's like, no, it's not. My kids love Lego, because you know why? Because it's a really creative and interesting thing to do, and it develops them more than spending all day long on their iPad. That's why I got my kids Lego, because I wanted them to do something creative and stimulating that took them away from a screen. I didn't get my kids Lego because I want to create the builders of tomorrow. I had no inkling that any of my kids are going to be architects or builders or anything else. I just thought it's really creative, fun, and interesting, something that we can do together, and something that isn't looking at a screen all day long. I'm not against screens, but I think kids sometimes need a break and do some other things. So this idea that they're creating the builders of tomorrow, it's like, who came up with that? Because the average parent that goes and buys Lego for their kids, that's the last thing in their mind. They're
They're
not
just getting
thinking
through
about creating
today. They're
builders.
just getting through to bedtime.
Exactly. Just, I want my kids to have things to do that are stimulating, interesting, creative, which doesn't always involve staring at a screen. That's why I got. And actually, if Lego said take your kids away from the screen, do something creative, that'd be much more of a purpose-led thing, which I could buy into, than creating of the builders of tomorrow. And I'm not picking on Lego, because it's a great product and they're a good brand, but yeah, I think people, selling plastic bricks wasn't good enough anymore. So we have to come up with some higher purpose to what we're trying to achieve. And actually, you don't.
No,
There's
you.
worthiness in creating plastic bricks.
Yeah, and this is this. So for me, we've come full circle, and we could go round and round and round and round for weeks and months. We really could, because at some stage, some sense, the people have got an idea that marketing is an incredibly creative thing that happens in a flash of inspiration, whereas you and I are in 100% agreement that good marketing is just about talking to your market and understanding their needs and their desires and delivering those. So there is no flash of inspiration. There is no necessarily. I mean, you can innovate, and some people do that brilliantly. People will cite Apple, but Apple isn't a case of innovation. It's a case of having thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people queuing up at your doors, wanting to spend money all day, every day. So yeah, so we're in complete agreement, and I think you've probably answered question number 3, which is like, how do people get better at marketing? Like, consistently, they need to get closer to their market, their customers. They need to hang out with their customers.
I would say two things to that question. Yeah, and we've covered them both, but I agree. If you want to get better at marketing, the first thing is spend time with your customers, and spend a lot of time with your customers. Take a day a week out of your diary. And by the way, CEOs should do this as well, and hang out with your customers, and be curious. Listen. It's not about you speaking, it's about you listening and being curious. And whatever they say is correct, but you just need to understand it, because they're the marketplace. So I think that's the first thing. And if marketers actually hung out with their audience, a lot of the mistakes that people make wouldn't happen, because they know their mistakes, because they're just so familiar with their customers. So I'd like to think I know my wife pretty well, right? So someone said to me, I'm going to get your wife this, Grant. Do you think it's a good idea? I'd instantly be able to say, oh, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think she's going to like that, because I know her really well.
Yeah.
We've been together a long time. So, but you need to know your customers intimately. You need to really understand them and what makes them tick, and the way they see the world and the way they perceive the world, and not to judge them for it, but just to understand it. So that's the first thing that I think is really, really important. And the other thing I'd say, which I know we've touched on, is be a student of marketing. If you really like marketing, be a student. Understand how it arrived. How did brand management happen? How did product management happen? Why did the idea of branding happen? When did it happen? Who's the godfather of modern branding? How does market positioning come around? What do the greats of marketing say about it? Because if you're really passionate about a subject, you want to learn on it, you've got a thirst to learn about it to become better. And all of those things are building blocks to make, it's the Isaac Newton thing, isn't it? If I'd achieved anything, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. Because
Yes.
in order to innovate at his level of science, he had to know everything that had come before him. Because there was a lot of great work that had done before him. He didn't become a scientist in a vacuum. He didn't start science. There was a whole discipline of it before he came along. And it's exactly the same with marketing. You can innovate, you can come up with new ideas, there'll be new inventions, new creatives, new creative channels like we're experiencing today with social media and other things. But be a student, be passionate about what came before you and understand that, because actually in a lot of that stuff that came before you is the answers to modern day problems as well.
Yes. And I would say not even just the giants, but also the monumental failures. Like anyone involved in brand should know about Ratner and how he completely destroyed his brand in 3 sentences. Because brands present as these hugely powerful things, but they are incredibly fragile, because what a brand is essentially is the idea of your business in people's minds, so it's one idea. So if you change that idea, it changes the whole thing, I think. Okay, cool. Excellent. This has been a really, really cool conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yes, have I. Thank you.
It's only a pleasure. Thank you. Okay, so question number 4. What should people read? You don't have to list your books again because I will list all of those so people can have access to those. But
Yeah.
outside of that, what should people read?
Yeah, I wouldn't have recommended my books anyway, so thank you.
Are they not very good?
Um, no, no, they shouldn't read them. Just that I hopefully not that narcissistic. No, but well, I'm very into behavioural psychology. I'm very into reading books about what makes people tick and how people work. I think that is incredibly informative for a marketer. So some of the books that I would recommend, one of them is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is almost the godfather of behavioral economics. All of his work in the 70s with a gentleman called Alan Tversky, who unfortunately died of cancer before they realized everything. But Daniel Kahneman himself won the Nobel Prize in behavioral economics in 1994, I think it was. But his book is Thinking Fast and Slow. So that's a brilliant book, I think, for people. There's another book called The Righteous Mind, which I quoted from earlier. That's Jonathan Haidt, which is spelled Haidt. And his book is The Righteous Mind. He's written a few, by the way, but that I think is particularly a good book, and also is very enlightening and very interesting. I think for marketing people. So I would not a pure marketing book again, but I would really recommend that for people. The other one that I would recommend, which is a slightly harder read, but I think is really interesting, is a book called Descartes' Error by a gentleman called Antonio Damasio. Damasio is Damasio. He is again a behavioral psychologist. I think he may have retired now. He's from Lisbon originally in Portugal, but he worked mainly out of Stanford University in America. And Descartes obviously was sort of came out of the Enlightenment era and really talked about the human beings as rational actors. And Damasio comes along and really proves that's not the case, and that we're governed by feeling. And his book proves that. It's a very scientific book, and that's why he called it Descartes' Error, of course. So there'd be 3 that I would recommend. There's only one other one that I'd say, which is a book called Nudge, which I think is by Richard Thaler, but people would have to check that out on Amazon. Which is a book about influence and persuasion. How do you nudge people? How do you get people to perhaps do things? And it's nudge because it's about gentle ways that you can influence behavior. And it's an incredibly interesting book. And again, I think invaluable for marketers. So they'd be the ones that I would choose for people. And as I said, none of them are classic marketing books. They're really behavioral books, but I think they're incredibly useful to inform people about perhaps another way of thinking about communication and stuff, which they haven't thought of before.
Excellent. Cool. There's only one of those that's been recommended before yesterday, Thinking Fast and Slow. Okay, cool. What did I want to say? I wanted to say, for me, it's about people's motivations, and it's not about like people think that sales and marketing is about convincing people to do stuff they don't want to do or getting them to do stuff that they don't want to do. And for me, that's just too difficult. Just work out what it is that they want to do and support them to do that is much better marketing for me. Okay, good. So the final question is, who can you throw under the bus? Who do you know? Who can you influence who might endure or enjoy a conversation like this with me?
Well, I can't promise, obviously, but the person that I will recommend to you, who you'll have tremendous fun with if he agrees to do it, is Drayton Bird. So Drayton Bird um, is a copywriter, really by profession. He was one of David Ogilvy's creative directors. He's in his 80s now. He's incredibly sharp. I think he's 84, might be 85. He's based out of Bristol, but he's an incredibly charismatic and fun guy. And what he doesn't know about copy and marketing almost isn't worth knowing.
Wow,
Um, so I will send him an email and recommend that he come on here and tell him I had fun doing it, and hopefully he'll agree. Um,
that would be
yeah,
amazing.
I think you'll have fun. He's. I always say to people, if marketing was music, Drayton would probably be one of the Beatles. He might not be Ringo, John or Paul. He might be Ringo, but that's still not a bad place to be. Yeah, yeah. So I'll email him and let him know. As I said, I can't promise,
No, but that would
but
be
but
astounding if he would come and talk to me.
I think you'll have a lot of fun if you could. He's a brilliant character. He's a brilliant character. So yeah, I'll big him up, and yeah, maybe he'll do it, and I'll email him and see if he will. But he's well, I'll link you the two of you. But he's a good guy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Is there somebody else?
He's the one that obviously comes to mind. There is another gentleman called Phil Hesketh who I love, who he's not a classic marketer. He talks about influence and persuasion, but I think on the back of our conversation, he might be quite fun to talk to. So I'll send him an email as well.
Fantastic. You're an absolute star. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I've like so
Well, thank you.
much.
I've really enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be here. So what we'll do is we'll do the pretend goodbye now for anyone who watches this, and then we'll say goodbye like normal human beings after we've done that, after I've pressed the stop record button. So thank you so much for your time, man. This has been, I think, a revelation. Like it's been really like my perception of you. I don't know what my perception of you was now. I don't know, but it's been a thoroughly interesting and useful conversation, I think. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really stimulating. Thanks.